Welcome back to another episode of Kicking It with Coach Red, where we bring you all the news, stories, takes, and opinions about your favorite teams from the Pacific Northwest, from the good to the bad to the Mariners.
The sweet, sweet Mariners.
Mariners out there making moves today, so maybe we should talk about them on the Wednesday episode of this podcast. News breaking a little bit late, so already had this one kind of buttoned up. So we'll be talking about the Polanco trade come Wednesday and the outlook for the Mariners. But we do have a more pressing issue, something that I think might be resolved, or at least some of these candidates getting a job by Wednesday. So we thought we'd jump into our third installment of the Seahawks coaching search. It seems to be down to a couple of guys. Um, so we are going to sit there and we are going to debate slash lawyering two of the top candidates, and
Lawyered.
that is Mike Macdonald and Ben Johnson. But before we get into that, why don't I tell you a little bit about us? If you're looking for a guy that is going to come to you just from the heart, he's going to give you the facts. He's going to make great statements. He's going to be well spoken, just like the famous lawyer Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. If you're looking for a guy like that, maybe you're looking for a guy like me, your boy Coach Red. You can find me on X at the real Coach Red, on Instagram at the real underscore Coach Red, TikTok at the real Coach Red. Also find the show over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, and leave a comment or two. And if you're looking for a guy that is going to try and sell you on all the glitz and glam, he's going to try and pull the wool over your eyes, just like
That's right.
Harvey Specter from Suits. If you're looking for a guy like that, maybe you're looking for a guy like Kane.
You can find me over on Twitter at Kane2406, on YouTube at Kane06, TikTok and Kane0624. Also follow the socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. Follows. Do it, freaking do it. Also, really like the Kill a Mockingbird little snippet there. That was
Little
good. That was
reference.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. That's why I picked the best lawyer out of all of
Good
them,
good
Atticus
little
Finch.
callback to
His
Mrs.
record's
Ives class.
impeccable. It's an impeccable record for Atticus Finch. Just
Hey,
like me, I'm proving my point on this podcast.
hey, that's just a good Miss Imes callback.
Oh, okay. Well, here's what we're gonna do. Um, Kane is going to be championing for Ben Johnson,
That's
and
right.
I will be pounding the table for Mike Macdonald. As you can see, I've got my Seahawks beanie on and repping the all black Nike sweatshirt. That's just an ode to Ravens defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald
All right. Well, I'm all about the true love out here. All
that
right.
you're going to be given towards Ben Johnson.
That's
Would you like
right.
to hear my opening statement on Mike Macdonald?
Uh,
Here to see.
the court is now in session. Bang.
Let me pull out my handy dandy notebook. Even when the Seahawks were scoring offensively, the defense was always the question mark. The Seahawks have talented players littered across this team. Don't you think the mastermind of the top scoring defense and ranked sixth in yards allowed would be a welcome addition? The Seahawks have not ranked as a top 15 defense in over 5 years. Baltimore has. Mike Macdonald came in for Wink Martindale in a 22nd ranked defense and has vaulted them into one of the league's best. Have a talented yet underperforming defense? Well, Macdonald has fixed that before. Now, I know Kane is going to talk about Ben Johnson, how he can make the offense amazing, but defense wins championships, and you have a bevy of playmakers that most offensive coordinators would salivate for. Give me Mike Macdonald or give me nothing.
What? Did you motivated you've already swayed, you know, people of the court from that opening statement.
That was a pretty
It
good one.
was,
All
it
right,
was
Kane,
such grandeur. I don't have one on the level,
let's hear
but
your opening statement on why the Seahawks need to hire Ben Johnson.
so for me, dude, this Seahawks offense, yeah, they put up points, but they just look boring doing it. It's stale. They kind of run the same things left and right. You get a guy in here that's capable of actually calling a game outside of, Sunday's NFC Championship where they blew a 24-point lead. But hey, that's neither here nor there.
You're not doing a very good job. You should have sold how well he did in the first half.
That's true. Uh, but if you look at what he's done with much less, I would say on a Lions offense, because really, if you really think about their pass catching guys out there, it's Amon Ra and Sam Laporta. That's about it. And then you get this bevy of receivers with the Seahawks. I mean, yes, Tyler Lockett's declining, but man, is he still showing that fire. I think if you can get an offensive mind like Ben Johnson with this Seattle Seahawks team, you're going to see a huge increase in what this and with the he's going to play to the running back strengths. He's going to get DK open and JSN open. The tight ends, Will Disley, going to be a star. So I can see it now. Get Ben Johnson. We need offense. We can just get a good DC to wrangle those guys in.
Okay. Well, let's go with a little bit of Mike Macdonald. And I know that you touched on you thought the Lions were not as talented offensively as the Seahawks. I'll dive into that a little bit more here in a second. But when you look at this Ravens defense, when you look at a lot of these players, Marlon Humphreys and Brandon Steffens are your starting corners. I would argue to say that when you throw in the likes of Reek, uh, Trey Brown, and potentially Spoon moving to the outside, that you have more talent there. They have Kyle Hamilton, who I think is a stud at strong safety, and Marcus Williams, both very good safeties, a good tandem. Well, what do the Seahawks have? A good tandem at safety with Julian Love, Quandre Diggs, and TBD on Jamal Adams. When you look at the linebacking core, this is kind of where that Ravens defense really stood out. You got Roquan Smith, who they traded for in the middle, who's an absolute stud. Patrick Queen, drafted in the same class as Jordan Brooks. And then you throw in Edefe Owe. And then across the line, you got Justin Matabuke, Michael Pierce, and Jadeveon Clowney as your top guys. So when you look at that across the board when it comes to talent, yeah, there's going to be a big void at the linebacker position coming for the Seahawks. But when you go player by player across the board, the Seahawks actually have a pretty good edge, I think, in the secondary and overall depth along the defensive line. When you throw in the likes of you're sitting there with Jaron Reed having a solid year, Draymond Jones, who did not play up to his potential, Chinny Nwosu, Boye Mafe. And the other thing is, when you look at teams and coaches that get a head coaching job, they typically try to bring people over with them that know their system. So if you're looking at this Ravens defense, there are two key names to look at, and that is Justin Matabuke on the D tackle spot and Patrick Queen. Both free agents and both could come over with this. If you insert one or both of those guys onto this team, yes, they'd be expensive. You'd have to do some restructuring, but with a guy who's shown that he can take a defense full of guys that are slightly underperforming, because Patrick Queen was looked at as a bust before Macdonald came into town. What he's done and been able to get these guys humming at such a level, they've been great at takeaways. Yes, they've given up some yards in the running game, but I think a lot of it is they were playing heavy for the pass because their offense led them to a position where a lot of teams are coming from behind. So you're protecting against the pass and a little bit more susceptible to the run. So I think that as a whole, when you look at 6 total in yards given up at first in scoring defense, that's a guy that can come and mold this defense into a star-studded caliber because you have pieces to make it happen.
Huh?
Julian Love, Pro Bowler. Spoon, Pro Bowler. You've got pieces in your secondary, which I would say is a younger iteration of that Ravens defense,
Okay.
especially in the secondary.
Okay, that's fair. It's a fair statement that, it's a good rebuttal. My rebuttal is this offense, I believe is a piece away, right? On that offensive line. You've seen the last 2 years of what Ben Johnson has done. And it has been nothing short of amazing. Especially this year. Third overall offense in the entire league. Had 4,300, no, 4,400 passing yards. It's pretty good. And also 2,300 rushing yards. I'm pretty sure he got 1,000 yards out of both his backs. Yeah. Imagine that with Sharps and Canine. Whew, that would be something else. This team needs to get back on top of the offensive game. I mean, put it out of reach to begin with, and yeah, let your defense do the rest of the work. Get the job done early, and let the don't absolutely let off the gas for sure, but they need something. They were pretty far difference between Detroit and Seattle in terms of offensive production on the year. I just really think that needs to turn around.
So when you look at the Lions offense versus the Seahawks offense, I would say that the Seahawks, talent wise, have the edge in the wide receiver room. And I think that's really about it. The tight end play by Sam Laporta, which is a guy that's a rookie that we liked coming into the draft. So, can you find a guy that could come and complement with Phil Disley? Sure. But I think where the biggest gap here is the offensive line. When
Yeah.
you look at that offensive line, it is littered with high draft picks and guys that have been putting together for a long spread of time. So when you look at this offense, you've got your starting tackles locked, cocked, and ready to rock. You've got both of your starting guards that are up in free agency this year, and your center and Evan Brown. Yes, you drafted Anthony Bradford. He played all right at times. I think that Evan Brown is a good piece that you would like to bring back, especially if Ben Johnson came to the team, since he has familiarity in that offense. But I think when you look at the quarterback play, it's a coin flip between Jared and Gino if the Seahawks decide to stay with Gino. And I think that with the production that he got out of David Montgomery, especially after not really lighting it up with Chicago, I would say that you kind of give the edge slightly to that Lions team.
Mhm.
So the one thing that I say is, sure, you get that. Who do you bring in to be the defensive coordinator? What names are out there that you know of? What are you thinking for a guy that Ben Johnson could bring to this team?
Hey, that's a job for Ben Johnson and Josh
Wow. Well, luckily for Atticus Finch over here, he comes prepared. If you
Snyder.
bring in Mike Macdonald, wow, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 potential offensive coordinators that I could bring in. Let's start off with ones that have links to the Ravens and or the Harbaugh tree. The first guy I want to bring up is David Shaw, former head coach for Stanford. He's been interviewed the last couple of go arounds, probably for Rooney Rule stuff for NFL jobs. He last coached at Stanford. Stanford had got tougher to play to recruit to. Yes, they obviously got quarterbacks that went to the league. You had Andrew Luck, of course. You had a lot of other guys that made it to the league, Davis Mills being another. So he consistently was around these guys that played pretty well. If you're looking for a guy that runs a solid offense and has worked with Harbaugh before, which Macdonald basically has his entire coaching career, David Shaw is an offensive minded guy that I think could slot really well into the offensive coordinator position. The next guy I want to talk about is T. Martin. He's the current quarterback coach for the Ravens. Obviously, he's coached with Macdonald. This guy's had offensive coordinator play calling duties at USC back in the day. So he's been around the offense and has coached the likes of Lamar Jackson. One of the things that he said that I read in an article was progressing the black quarterback with the Seahawks having a black quarterback in Geno Smith. I think that this could be something where you could unlock it a little bit more and get a little creative with the run game with Geno, as you saw at times this year. One more guy, a guy that's been a head coach in the league, was a 1 year stint for the Houston Texans, and that's David Culley. He was the former wide receiver coach and passing game coordinator for the Ravens before he took the job with the Texans. Obviously, didn't seem like a guy that was ready to get the keys to the whole team, which it was a 1 year deal, and he was out. So, guy that also Mike Macdonald's been around. Some other guys that are on the streets right now, you've got Eric Bieniemy, who outside of Andy Reid didn't have the best year, but you look at a Commanders offense where I would say your running back room, I would say is slighted to the Seahawks having better players there. I think in your wide receiver room and tight end, better there because Logan Thomas can stay available. I think the offensive line is about a wash, if not the Seahawks at a little bit higher clip. So I think that could be a fun little addition for a guy trying to rebuild his brand. A few of these guys I have are all rebuild their brand type of guys. Byron Leftwich was a hot name working with Tom Brady down in Tampa Bay. Has the big year, wins the Super Bowl, is getting these head coaching interviews, and then a year later he is gone. So another guy that's kind of been on the streets for a year that could be itching to come back. The other guy, Cliff Kingsbury, he knows the division. He's a guy that's coached the likes of Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, and Caleb Williams this last year at USC as an offense analysis for them. Some other guys that I think that they don't really have any ties to McDonald, but I think are names that should be brought up. Arthur Smith. How putrid that offense was in Atlanta really undermines what he was able to do when he was with Mike Vrabel, a defensive minded head coach with the Titans. He resurrected Ryan Tannehill. He started feeding the beasts in King Henry, and they also had a guy that is pretty comparable to DK Metcalf in AJ Brown on that team when he was
True.
there. Another guy, Anthony Lynn, big running backs coach, former head coach for the Chargers, and is a guy that's well respected around the league. He is currently the what was it, run game coordinator for the 49ers. So make your team better while stealing from your enemy. Love to see it. And who did I have left? Frank Reich. Frank Reich is a guy that I think just didn't have enough pieces offensively to work. Their offensive line with Carolina was not good. From everything I heard, I think Tepper was the guy that wanted to go and get Bryce Young, and he wanted CJ Stroud, so it never really lined up for him. This is a guy that has done big things with the Colts when they were running and rolling, and I think that this is another guy that take away the HC title for a little bit and give some of these guys some offensive play calling control. And with McDonald, from everything I'm hearing, he's not the biggest talker. He's not the group talker. He's a one-on-one connector, and I think he's very short and succinct. He doesn't need to be the rah-rah guy, and I think having Pete Carroll around can help bring that out of him a little bit. And I think that having an offensive play caller that has been around the league for a while and has had success, or a guy that he is familiar with, I think can really vault this team, because offensive coordinators should be itching to go after this team. That's why I say getting that defensive mind in place is the key for me. I can find an offensive coordinator. Before, the longest tenured one was recently hired by the Titans in Callahan, and so it's been 2 years is the longest stint that an offensive coordinator has been on a current team. Granted, some of those guys a lot of them have went to head coaching jobs where they're still calling plays, but give me a defensive minded guy. I think that's what this team needs.
All right. That's fair.
So who do you have for your defensive coordinators? Did you think of any? Not even like Wink Martindale?
There you go. Wink Martindale.
There's a name.
Dude, I don't know who has been let go and who's not. I don't really pay attention to other teams outside of the Hawks.
Wow. Oh,
so
give me some more reasons why Ben Johnson's the guy.
Dude, he just gives me Dan Campbell energy. And I think that's what this team needs as well. you see, we've talked about it before. Dan Campbell makes you want to run through a brick wall. Like the dude is a motivator, and in Hard Knocks, as we've said too, you see him and Aaron Glenn compete day in and day out. And I just think that the team has been so set in their ways. Yes, with Pete, it's lackadaisical. Feels like let them be who they are. I understand that. I think you need a little more structure and just the guy to bring out the energy. And I think that Ben Johnson can do that. And this team has just been lacking on the energy side because when you're 9-8 2 years in a row, it's not that fun. So there's my rebuttal. Not as glamour, glitz, and fancy, but
I mean, that's what I build you as, so you got to step it up. I would guess that Ben Johnson has kind of been under the Dan Campbell tree. I would say that you could probably look at some guys that are currently on staff that aren't in um, coordinator jobs that you could look at possibly him bringing over. Obviously, Aaron Glenn, you can't make a um, neutral move, so you can't take someone's defensive coordinator to be your defensive coordinator unless they're
yep.
let go. Um, so when I look at some of these guys, I'd probably look more towards their defensive line coach, which I'm looking up right now, John Scott Jr. He's done a pretty good job with the likes of Aiden Hutchinson. Granted, he's a top prospect, but I think that they got a lot out of a pass rush that is not necessarily the most star-studded unit. And not really a lot of other guys that I recognize on that staff. So I think that it'd be tougher to fill your defensive coordinator position, which I think has plagued the Seahawks since Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator.
He might not even get a head coaching gig.
I mean, it's going to be really interesting because there's only 2 head coaching jobs left open, and with the Seahawks, they finally were able to put in their request for Mike Macdonald, and I think that it's a guy that they were saying they were going to wait to talk to him until afterwards, so they were prepared to ride this thing out to the end. So that makes me think that they'd lean, especially to the defensive side.
That's fair. And I know that they're getting on their second interviews with Ben Johnson as well.
Today.
And so, either way, I don't think we'll be upset.
Really selling Ben Johnson here.
I don't think we'll be upset either way, honestly. If you really think about it, we need a new head coach, and they're 2 great candidates when it comes down to it. I mean, what more can you ask for?
I can tell you what more you can ask for: stability at the head coaching position. So I'm going to talk to you about a handful of guys that were in the last 2 coaching cycles that were hired. And I'm going to start with defensive coordinators that were hired to um, the head coaching position. Back in 2022, you had Matt Eberflus, who came from the Colts over to the Bears, and there was a vote of confidence with how they progressed down the stretch this year for Eberflus to keep his job, still employed. The other guy is Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles takes over, and it really helps bring the Bucks back to the playoffs, and they win a playoff game this year under Todd Bowles.
Yeah, Todd Bowles has been around
Okay,
for a long,
so
long time.
let me talk. Let me now talk. So those were the 2 defensive coordinators that were hired. Okay, feel good about that. Now let me talk about the offensive coordinators who went to head coaches that are no longer head coaches. Nathaniel Hackett and Joshy Boy McDaniels. So Nathaniel Hackett couldn't finish his first year. Joshy Boy couldn't finish his second. Okay, those are, one guy's a first-time head coach, the other one's a retread. Let's go to last year's candidates for defensive coordinators that went on to become head coaches. The first one I'm going to talk about is Jonathan Gannon, who went from Philly over to Arizona. When you really look at this, Arizona, for the first half of the year, with no Kyler Murray, it's going to be tough to win games. They won a game before they got Kyler Murray back. Down the stretch, the Cardinals were a very tough team to play. And you really got that defense starting to hum a little bit, especially without very much name recognition on that team. Realistically, Buda Baker. and that's about it for that team. He was able to get some, and I think there's confidence building for him in that building. The other guy is D'Amico Ryans, who goes to the Texans, who had been much maligned and playing and really underperforming for a couple of years, and they're super young. He goes out and takes this team, which is, Slowek was very good at getting CJ Stroud humming, but they go and face a top defense like the Browns and absolutely blow them out in the playoffs. Granted, they hit a big hiccup once they faced the Ravens and Mike Macdonald's defense, but I think everyone's super high on D'Amico Ryans for
Well,
the
yeah.
Houston Texans. Okay. An offensive coach, Frank Reich, was hired by Carolina and was let go before the end of the year. So in the last 2 years, you've had four
You also have
defensive
the guy
coordinators.
in Indy, the offensive coordinator from Philadelphia is.
I'm only talking about the ones that have gotten fired so
Oh,
far. I'm not talking about all the offensive coordinators.
okay,
I'm
fair.
saying that in the last 2 years, every defensive coordinator that has been elevated to a head coaching job still is employed. In that same span, three guys that are offensive minded are no longer employed. The defense gives you a little bit more stability. When you really look at these teams, Todd Bowles really ramped up in year two. Eberflus really ramped up in year two. D'Amico in year one. It'll be interesting to see what Gannon does in year two. Granted, I hope that he does absolutely terrible again against the Seahawks, just like he did this year.
uh, okay. Major point.
So, do I like Ben Johnson? Sure, I like Ben Johnson. They came out humming against the 49ers, but when you really look at that game, they come out hot and they get a little bit more stale in the second half. The defensive adjustments that the 49ers made at half really stifled the Lions, and it was tough sledding for them to get points the rest of that game. When you look at what Mike Macdonald did, the
See how
Chiefs had
Patrick
17
Mahomes
points at
is.
half. They
Yeah.
shut Mahomes out in the second half, and I think they had about 100 yards of offense in the second half. He really locked down in that second half. Those adjustments in game are something that I want to see, because typically what you've seen from the Seahawks is their inability to make adjustments in game. Under the last couple of years under Pete Carroll, especially the last five, you've seen if things are going good, they continue to go good. If they're struggling, trying to flip that switch and really get something going hasn't been something that this team has done a very good job of. I think that with Mike Macdonald, he can sit there and look at what's going on in a certain game and adjust on the fly. Especially, it's proven point from recency bias. You look at what he did against the 49ers this year with creating turnovers against Brock Purdy. Yeah, they played a close game with the Rams, but it was when the Rams were kind of playing hot and they were kind of coming off of, it was kind of a trap game for them. And you look at what they did against another Shanahan tree guy in Mike McDaniels. Big win for the Ravens there. So, and then you look at Slowick, who was, everyone raved this guy's going to get a head job after the blowout win against the Cleveland Browns, and they shut the door on that Houston Texans offense. So I think this guy has shown against proven play callers that he has the ability to make adjustments and do enough to make sure that his team wins, especially when their offense was humming for the Ravens. And we really look at, the Ravens are a good team. They're predicated on the run. You're going to assume that you're going to try and get some of that. But when you look at the complement of pass catchers the Ravens put out there, they're nowhere close to what the Seahawks had this last year. So I think
Yeah.
that with that, I think that any offensive mind that he would want to bring in would be chomping at the bits to get their hands on DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba, K9, and Charbonnet. And you have the luxury of Geno, who's going to come in as the 18th highest paid quarterback at the start of the league year, if you want to keep him, or drafting a quarterback at 16 in this year's upcoming draft.
Yeah. Okay.
Mike Macdonald, it is. So for my closing arguments, I'll let you go first, Kane. Close it down on why Ben Johnson is the dude to get for the Seahawks.
As I said before, I want someone that's going to open this play calling book up, and just there's too much talent offensively for me for them to not be where they should be. And I think that with the mind of Ben Johnson, you could really just floor it from the get go and keep it more consistent throughout the entire game. And it's something also that the Hawks have been struggling with is consistency on the offensive side for 4 quarters. And I don't like to see it because we sit there and watch them run for 2 quarters and all the years of not doing anything until the fourth quarter. And here you go, Russ, take it away. Like, let's just win football games at the start and finish the game. And I think Ben Johnson can do that. Coach Red, what's your closing argument?
Mike Macdonald has thrived in balance, having an above average defense to pair with an above average offense. He's worked with winners. He's been around the Harbaughs his entire career. When he was at Michigan, Michigan's a Final Four team. When he was back with the Ravens are a top defensive unit. Even last year, when Lamar was hurt, that defense was still humming. They were still a top 10 defense. They just weren't getting enough offensively with the bevy of injuries and the lack of playmakers to make that happen. I think that with this Seahawks team, you can really thrive with Geno Smith coming back. You can make some moves, go get some of these Ravens players with Patrick Queen or Justin Matabuke. Matabuke is the guy that I would love to see on this team. This guy's a wrecker in the middle. And I think that playing under Macdonald again would be a plus for him. I think that with this, you bring in a guy that by reports from 710 Sports, he's not the most vocal leader. He really connects and he really gets guys to buy in, but he's a more one-on-one guy. I think having Pete Carroll in the building can help bring that and foster growth in that area. This guy knows the X's and O's. He's been labeled as a wunderkind. And I think that if you can get a little bit of personality with that and pair him with a guy that has offensive playing or offensive play calling in his background, I think that the Seahawks could just find a yin and yang that could really push them over the top. I think there are more offensive coordinators out there that you could bring in that, like I've said, would salivate over the weapons. Mike Macdonald is the guy. It's the guy that they were going to wait for until after the Super Bowl to continue to interview. So if he's the guy, have your interview with him tomorrow, follow it up the second day, back to back days, put pen to paper, get this guy in the building.
There you go. It's as easy as that.
It is pretty easy. You know what else is pretty easy? Following us on social media. You can find me, your boy Coach Red, on X at the real Coach Red, on Instagram at the real underscore Coach Red, TikTok at the real Coach Red. Also find us over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, leave a comment or two. Kane, where you at?
You can find me on Twitter at Kane2406, on YouTube at Kane06, TikTok and Kick Kane0624. Also follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. Follow us. Do it, freaking do it.
And as always, stay fresh.
Stay fresh, peeps.
Peace.